In 1766, when Samuel Adams called a meeting at this Boston tavern to launch the American Revolution, the Sons of Liberty were not the only ones that came. Women were right there from the beginning, and some would take on roles equal to those of the Founding Fathers. After the French and Indian Wars ended in 1763, the stationing of British troops in the colonies led to protests, which led to the Boston Massacre in 1770, the Boston Tea Party in 1773, and eventually to the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The Declaration of Independence was co-written by one of America's most famous revolutionaries, John Adams, and beside him, helping him in every step he took, was his wife, Abigail. She would become America's second First Lady and the mother to America's fourth President, John Quincy Adams. Abigail Adams was one half of America's first power couple and a standard bearer for women's rights. Her observations on American politics, as well as philosophical and personal subjects, were often ahead of her time. When Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson were drafting the Declaration of Independence in May of 1776, Abigail wrote John Adams to argue the importance of women's independence.
I cannot say that you are very generous to the ladies, for whilst proclaiming peace and goodwill to men, emancipating all nations, you insist upon retaining absolute power over wives. But you must remember that arbitrary power is like most other things which are very hard, very liable to be broken. Abigail Adams.
Then, Abigail Adams prophesied what would eventually take place, that women would accomplish what these learned men were afraid to do.
And notwithstanding all your wise laws and maxims, we have it in our power not only to free ourselves, but to subdue our masters, and without violence throw both your natural and legal authority at our feet.
Abigail continued to exert her influence on American politics through her husband. She fought for equal education for girls, accomplished by Mary Lyon, and she called for an end to slavery, accomplished by the many women abolitionists. Her letters and her achievement as one of America's most powerful women would inspire women of future generations, such as Edith Wilson, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Hillary Clinton. While Abigail Adams was helping to shape the ideals of America's freedom, other women were in the trenches fighting for it. For example, Mary Ludwig Hayes, otherwise known as Molly Pitcher, saved the day at the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey on June 28, 1778. When American soldiers were dropping from heat stroke, Mary relieved the men with pitchers of water from a nearby spring. Then, after her husband fell wounded, Mary took his place at the cannon, firing shell after shell and forcing the British to withdraw. For her heroic role, General Washington gave her a battlefield rank as a non-commissioned officer, and thereafter she was known as Sergeant Molly. In 1778, Deborah Sampson of Plymouth, Massachusetts, disguised herself as a young man, and enlisting under the name Robert Shirtliff, she served for 3 years and was wounded twice. After the war, she received a soldier's pension of 34 pounds sterling. From the Daughters of Liberty, who toiled in support of the colonial protests, to Abigail Adams, who helped shape the institutions of liberty, to the women who fought for that liberty. American women were patriots in every sense of the word. Later, they would write their own piece of the Constitution, the 19th Amendment, the right for women to vote. Reach for the highest office when Geraldine Ferraro ran for vice president, and in the 21st century, fight side by side with men in Iraq and Afghanistan.